think about this, all right? Jonah is a guy who was in this situation, surrounded by people who are terrified, who are having all of their stuff stripped away from them. They're throwing it overboard. They're crying out to all these different gods. They're trying to do anything that works. Anything that works. Everybody's praying. And here Jonah is. He's a guy that's been sent on a missionary journey. He's like, you have a message of hope. And now he's in a place where people are hopeless. And yet it seems as though he just couldn't be bothered. Right? It just seems as though he just couldn't be bothered. And yet the reality is, we as believers, as followers of Jesus, those of you in here who would claim Christianity, we have been given a great commission, right? We have been given a mission. God says, hey, Jesus says in Matthew 28, go into all the world, make disciples, baptizing them, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded you, and I'm going to be with you always to the very end of the age. And yet there are so many times where we look at the world and we're like, but they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear this message of hope that we have. It's really hard out there. I don't know if you've ever tried to share the gospel, but it's really hard out here. And yet the reality is, I was just reading recently, this past weekend, I was reading again where studies show that 80% of 80% of Americans are spiritually curious. 80%. Those odds are really good. The people that you talk to are spiritually curious. So what does that mean for us? It might mean that they're just closed to easy answers. It might mean that if we're like, oh, but they don't want to hear. Maybe they don't want to hear somebody preaching at them. Maybe they don't want to hear somebody who's already prejudged where they're at, and then starting from that point. But if we can engage curiously, there might be openness that we aren't seeing. Like there's oftentimes we look at the actions of people. We look at actions and we assume motives, don't we? We look at actions and we assume motives. We look at people who, and again, depending on what side of an issue you might be sitting on, you look at people on the other side. And it's like, they're getting. I mean, here recently, it's like they're getting really mad about immigration. It's like they must hate people that don't look like them, or they just want open borders, and they're just they're going out in the streets and they're doing all these different things. Or we look at people who like one of the guys in my group when we were talking about Iran and what's happening over there, he was getting really heated, and it was super interesting because he's a really quiet guy, but he was getting really heated. And then as he started talking, he started sharing a story about how his wife died a few years ago. And when his wife died, he was living overseas, and there was a Palestinian woman who just took him under his wing in the worst part of his life, where he didn't know what to do, didn't know what to do. This woman, who did not share the same faith as him, loved him and healed. And he was able to come out of that time because of her loving him. See, and he was getting really heated, but the reason behind it was he had been ministered to by this person. See, we see the actions and we just assume the motives. And yet if we stop and we look around and we see people around us, you might say, Luke, the world around us is crazy. Yes, it is crazy. But do we ask why people are doing the things they do? Do we ask why people are holding on to the things that they're holding on to? Like I was talking to somebody this past week about like pornography. It's a destructive addiction that affects so many people. And yet even with pornography, with an addiction like pornography, there is a reason that is there. You see, in the church, we look at things like that and we're like, stop it. Bad. Cut it out. Right? And that would be great if that worked, right? If you can think about like, okay, what I need to do, if I have a behavior that I don't like, okay, stop it. Whew, oh man, that's great. Whew, I'm just free now. Does that work for anybody? No, but if we stop and say, hey, here's the thing. This is what's happening. Yeah, we want to label it as bad. And yes, we don't want this thing. But if we stop and if we ask, what's happening under here? What are you feeling? What's your story? What's going on? We open ourselves to curiosity. And what we might find is that person we're talking to is actually more open than we would have ever realized. Do you have those stories in your family that have become like lore, in your family? Everybody has these. I was thinking just last night, again, there was a story, and I fact-checked it this morning. I was like, this doesn't sound real. So I'm going to ask. And so I asked my sister, and she's like, yeah, it happened. So we were at my grandparents' house, and there must have been, I don't know if it was like some kind of family get-together. My sister was super young. She comes running through the front door screaming, just screaming. And my dad, I'm assuming it was my dad, which is terrible to assume this, but I'm assuming, right? I'm assuming that it was my dad was like, shut up, right? Like grandpa, and my dad is not a mean guy, but grandpa was like, you didn't yell around grandpa. He's kind of like, he's a great guy. It's just be, you just want to be calm around grandpa. He's like a dog. You don't know what's going to happen, right? That sounds terrible. Anyway, this is getting worse. But my sister runs through the door. She's screaming. Somebody in my life says, shut up. And then my Aunt Peggy, my sister fact-checked that this morning, my Aunt Peggy looks behind her. She's screaming because my cousin clamped vice grips onto her back. They were out in my grandpa's shop, and my cousin, I don't know how that happened. How do you even do that? But he clamps vice grips, and if you know what vice grips are, they're pliers that when you clamp them on, they're on. See, isn't that funny? All my dad heard was screaming child. But when he took a second look, there's a reason. See, I think that people around us might be way more open to hearing about God than we are to share. See, we think about like, well, if I share that, what if I get it wrong? If I share that, what are they going to think about me? If I share this, who am I thinking about? Who am I thinking about? Me. But if I start with a foundational belief that, man, God loves the people I'm around, that there is suffering in this world that I have hope for. See, the reality is the world is going to stay lost if those of us who have the map to know how to be found keep our mouths shut. The darkness is dark because the light's not there. Right?